Hey there, it's Dr. Scott. For English 1B, I want to show you a very special top 10 tips that I made just for English 1B. And it actually will work for any literature class anywhere on the planet, including all the Foothill English 1Bs that you might be interested in. It's called Literary Launchpads, How to Write Papers About Imaginative Literature. And by that imaginative literature, I mean exactly what we're reading in English 1B at Foothill College, which is poems and plays and short stories and novels. That's the curriculum. In English 1A, you read non-fiction writing about real-world events. In English 1B, we're making everything up. I like to say novelists lie for a living. So do short story writers. Poets tell the truth, but famously they tell it slant. And of course, theaters are full of make-believe. So how do you write about this stuff that's not quite really real, except it's real at the heart level, at the emotional level? True to life, one might say. Well, here's 10 ways that any English major would tell you will work. And I'm going to go through the easy ones first and the hard ones later. So, easiest, most classic way ever is to focus on a crucial character. If you happen to be reading, let's say, Flight Behavior with me this quarter, that would mean you could write a whole paper about Della Robbia, a whole paper about Cub, a whole paper about Hester. Often it helps to choose a minor character, however. So again, just using something like Hamlet, for example, there are a billion papers about Hamlet and a million papers about Ophelia, but there are fewer papers about Polonius and even fewer papers and one famous play about these sub-characters called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. So by doing the subreddit of the subreddit of the subreddit with characters, you can often really impress your instructor and inform people, even those who have read the book very carefully. And that's another thing I should be saying here. These papers are all written for people who have already read the book, already read the play, already read the poem 1,000 times, already seen the movie, the play, the book, the everything. So this is at the expert level, not at the beginner level. It's not what I would call a book review, and I am in the National Book Review Circle Critics organization, but these are not the same kind of papers. So for number 2 here, you might be looking at a central conflict. And by conflict, I mean, at least in my lingo, I mean a conflict between two characters. So Hamlet versus Ophelia, Hamlet versus the Queen, Hamlet versus the King. Or to use Flight Behavior, Della Robbia versus her husband Cub, Della Robbia versus her mother-in-law Hester, Della Robbia versus the whole town, etc., etc. It's that kind of versus thing that makes a fine, fine paper. The crucial character, you're just looking at one person in the narrative, and in the central conflict, you're looking at two people kind of fighting it out and saying, well, who do you think wins? What does this mean? You can write a whole paper on a key word. Yeah, really, really, you can. In Hamlet, you can write about to be or not to be. You can write a whole paper about the word be. Honestly, you can spend your whole life on that one, and you can definitely write a whole paper in, let's say, Flight Behavior on one key word like rapture, which is right there in the very first sentence, but comes up again and again and again in the narrative. You can write about a key quote. By the way, it's probably best if it's not on the first page, just to convince your instructor, your professor, your TA that this is not the only page you've read. But I often ask students in my office, what's the most important sentence in the whole book for you? What's the most important sentence? What's the most important line in the whole poem? What's the most important line in the whole play? Focus there, and you can write a whole paper literally describing why that line, that sentence is so important and how it unlocks the entire work of fiction or drama or poetry, whatever it may be. Often you can focus on the whole title. Hamlet's not that interesting, I admit, but let's say another Shakespeare title like All's Well That Ends Well or Love's Labor Lost, yep, you can definitely write a whole paper about that. You can write a whole dissertation about that. Flight Behavior, New York 2140, all these books that I've been reading lately in my English 1B classes, same thing. Now, those are all the easy ones because They don't require any additional research. You just read the book very carefully, the poem, the play, the short story, and then you hone in on one thing. It's like the subreddit of the subreddit of the subreddit of the subreddit, and that's what you write your whole paper on. And of course, in Reddit land, I'm using that metaphor very consciously because I know you live in a social media world. In that subreddit land, that's where the real experts lurk, right? So you got to go down to the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth level of the subreddit before people really want to get into the details of what we're talking about. We're not at the very basic level. That's part of being an advanced college writer. But none of that required any additional research. All of these last 10 actually do require some additional research. Guess what? That's why graduate students read them, use them. That's why advanced students use them. And guess what? This actually makes it easier to write the paper, even though beginners don't think so, because you don't have to think of everything. You look up what other people say, and that can be really fascinating, and it can write half your paper for you. So if you look at historical context, by that I mean like what's going on in Denmark at the time that Hamlet's living, what's going on in Shakespeare's life or Shakespeare's time at the time that Shakespeare is writing, or to use flight behavior, my current novel, what's up in the Appalachians of West Virginia, which is where the novel is set at this particular time. And of course, part of what's up is climate change, hint, hint, hint. And recent historical context includes several megastorms rolling through, droughts, floods, and freezes, and everything else that can go wrong when the climate goes awry. So focusing on historical context can really be powerful. You can also focus on a critical theory. We're going to work much harder on this in English 1B, but this involves taking a critical theory, such as something you might have learned in psychology, philosophy, sociology, political science, and any number of fields, and applying it to the book that you happen to be reading. And because it's almost like this outside spotlight or this extra surgical scalpel, you can frequently uncover things in the novel or the book or the poem or the play or the short story or the drama which other people have skipped over, but which are crucial to understanding what's really going on. You can also look at a crucial contradiction. By this, I mean these very large-scale moral arguments and moral conflicts, not the conflict between one character and another, between Hamlet and his mom, between Della Robbia and her husband Cub, but very large philosophical conflicts between love and hate, good and evil, comedy, tragedy, and etc. And these can make marvelous papers, but you do need to come in with some outside context, some outside quotes to make them really fly, because they do involve very large context. I know that most of you think that all English papers are about a central symbol. This is the stereotype about what English majors do. We chase symbols. Like most stereotypes, there's a grain of truth in there. Yeah, sometimes we do. Like most stereotypes, this is overblown and exaggerated. Nevertheless, even though there are lots of other ways to write the paper, like the other 8 that I just went through, focusing on a central symbol can be really powerful. The butterflies in flight behavior. In Hamlet, the skull that he holds up, alas, poor Yorick. Things like that. So I'm just naming sort of famous symbols. The color purple in the book, the novel, The Color Purple. Finally, you can look at the whole moral message. Like what? I love this question because I think students frequently skip over it. Why is the author telling you this story? It's like biblical parables or any of the parables in other religious traditions. There's a moral to the story. There's a reason. There's a deeper hidden meaning behind the story itself. And if you can dig down subreddit into the deeper hidden meaning, then you're really getting down to the key kernel of truth that the author is attempting to convey. So give that a try. And I'm going to give you a hint if you're reading Cli-Fi with me, which is that deeper moral truth almost always revolves in some way or shape or form in Cli-Fi around our human species, individuals, you, me, the characters confronting the horrible and yet undeniable presence and reality of climate change. Looking forward to seeing which of these 10 you pick, and of course, go ahead and mix and match. You can always focus on a character through the title, using a critical theory, and looking at a central symbol. So you can do a little stir fry with these, but usually starting with one or the other is the best way to go.